let us begin. Welcome from my side. I'm Jeff Gedman with American Purpose. This conversation today runs 55 minutes, 5, and then a hard stop. With American Purpose, it somehow turns out to be a bit of a China week. This week, we published yesterday, Michael Mandelbaum on Taiwan, the world's most dangerous place on the planet at the moment, argues Michael. On Friday, we have a larger piece on China by Charles Horner and Eric Brown. And today, a conversation I would suggest centering around EU-China relations and human rights principally, but we'll see which way that goes. Reinhard Bütikofer is going to get a proper introduction by Craig Kennedy, our moderator. I'll just say, it's good to see you, Reinhard. You've been a friend for years. You and I first met a decade and a half ago when I was running the Aspen Institute Berlin, and you were co-chair of the German Green Party. And we did a lot together to confuse a lot of people in very good ways, I'd like to say. So welcome, Reinhard. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for your very, very valuable time. Craig Kennedy is Senior Fellow with American Purpose, a Senior Advisor, Board Member, and former President of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. And Craig will do the honors of introducing Reinhard, starting the conversation, then in due course, opening up to questions and comments. Craig, welcome and thank you.
Jeff, thank you so much. Reinhard, it's really great to be here with you today. So Reinhard Bütikofer is a longtime German politician, got a start on the Heidelberg City Council, went to the Landtag in Baden-Württemberg, and then for a number of years was Secretary General of the Green Party and finally co-chair of the Green Party. In 2009, he entered the European Parliament, where I think it's fair to say he's been maybe the most outspoken voice on human rights. One of his centrist, maybe conservative colleagues called him the biggest pain in the ass that we've ever had in the Parliament because of his endless demands that Europe live up to its standards. So on March 22nd, Reinhard, along with 4 colleagues in the European Parliament, 5 other individuals, and a handful of organizations throughout Europe, was banned by the Chinese government from entering China, Hong Kong, and Macau. I like the fact that they were so legalistic with the way that they defined the banning, and made it very clear that anybody else that was critical of them would get a similar fate. So we will try to hide all of your names today, so none of you suffer that. But why don't we start with that, Reinhard? What was the motivation? It's not like you've just started being critical of China. As a matter of fact, we did an interview with you in January that appeared on American Purpose where you were very, very sharp and critical. Why now? Why the 5 people in the Parliament? And why the organizations that they targeted?
Well, thank you, first of all, Jeff and Craig, for having me and giving me the opportunity of this exchange. I would say that certainly this is not just a Reinhard Bütikofer event. Altogether, 10 people were sanctioned, 8 of them members of parliament, and 2 researchers. Adrian Zenz, for instance, the German researcher who helped to discover a lot about of China's dirty secrets about the Uighurs, has also been sanctioned, together with the whole Human Rights Subcommittee of the European Parliament, and also a very important German think tank, MEPs, which is, I assume, the largest China-only think tank, at least in Europe, maybe in the Western world altogether. And this came mostly as a surprise to observers of the EU's China policy. Everybody expected China to somehow retaliate for the fact that the European Union did sanction 4 Chinese officials and one entity, the Xinjiang Production and Construction Company. But the reaction was so out of dimension. It was so clearly escalating that few or almost none would have predicted that. So in a way, of course, it acknowledges the work that some of us have been doing. I've been the chair of the China delegation of the European Parliament since 2019 now, and worked in the context for many years before. And I have indeed been critical, as everybody I think should be, of China's policy, not only its domestic policy with regard to the Uighurs and Tibet and the Mongols, but also their overall oppression of human rights, and but also, of course, China's foreign policy. It's increasingly aggressive foreign policy, ranging from the Himalayan borders with India through the South China Sea up until the Senkaku Islands and the Japanese concerns. But I would not say that it was of necessity that they had to go for such a strong reaction. They did this on purpose because they wanted to demonstrate to the European side that China was willing to escalate extremely in case Europe would not understand the message. And the message is now, and this is a novel message, the message is either you want to do business with us, or you will take the liberty of criticizing what we do. China has said that in different ways, that Europe has to make a decision. Europe either should want to team up with the Americans, with the British, with the Canadians, the Australians, or else Europe should understand that China is not willing anymore to take public criticism as a fact of life. And that creates a new situation, which is indeed changing the overall trajectory of EU-China relations.
So, Reinhard, let me stop you there and just ask what I think is an obvious question. So the EU-China Comprehensive Agreement on Investments has to pass the European Parliament. You have the power to vote it up or down. I think that's correct. What were they trying to do? It just seems like very odd timing to send a shot across the bow, and especially to target members of the European Parliament.
Indeed, that is not what the conventional diplomacy would do. But I think Chinese leaders were taken aback by the fact that even though they granted Europe this great deal, the Europeans were still willing to insist on also voicing criticism. Now, from my angle, I would say that the European criticism, the European sanctions were kind of lightweight. For instance, the party boss of Xinjiang, Chen Quanguo, who is the architect of the oppressive police state there, was not sanctioned. That clearly signaled that the Europeans didn't want to go all out, but they insisted. While China obviously had misunderstood the agreement over the comprehensive investment deal as a signal that they had it made, driving a wedge between the US and the Europeans. They thought that after Merkel had been able to pull this off, that those European leaders who would rather opt for short-term economic benefit over geopolitics and over European values, that they were clearly in control, that the whole narrative of systemic rivalry could be forgotten, probably, that it was never meant to be in the long term, that Europe was finally on the way of preferring China's deal to Biden's offer. And the fact that this was not the case, the fact that the European public, the democratic public, and also the parliament insisted on voicing criticism over the deal already made it very difficult to imagine that this deal would ever pass the European Parliament. And China obviously now thought it was strong enough to force European leaders to take a hard decision, which of course leaders like Merkel and Macron have wanted to avoid at high cost. Now they felt that things were not moving their way, and obviously this was also a loss of face for Xi Jinping, because late last year, Xi Jinping took the Europe file from his number two, from Li Keqiang, and made it his own prerogative to do the European stuff. And now he felt, obviously, that they had miscalculated and that the Europeans were not as forthcoming as they thought we would be. And out of that frustration, together with the hope that they might find enough support for the economic offers at the expense of Europe's geopolitical role, of Europe's values, that led them to take this decision. I think that as far as anybody can tell, the investment deal is pretty much dead, even before it's ever been debated in the full parliament.
Well, so this leads to my next question. And please, if you have a question, either send a chat or use the hand raise function, or simply wave at me and I'll try to make sure that I see you. So what's the response been in Brussels? Has this dramatically changed the kind of prevailing views towards China? And I guess as a second question, what was the response in Germany, which I would say, based on the interview we did with you and other things I know, has probably been maybe the most stalwart defender of getting along with China?
Well, in Brussels, I would say the reaction was very good. The president of the European Parliament took the opportunity at the opening of last week's parliamentary session to take a very clear stance, make a very clear statement. There was a wave of solidarity. There also was a lot of solidarity by instance from the Bundestag. A couple of colleagues from the Foreign Relations Committee from the Bundestag, including Norbert Röttgen from CDU, took the initiative and collected signatures for a statement of solidarity. And within a day or so, more than 280 members of the Bundestag from liberals, conservatives, socialists, and Greens signed on to that. That was very good. The one instance that did not show any signal of solidarity was, and you're already smiling because you can guess, Craig, that was the Chancellor's office. I know that the Chancellor thought about mentioning the issue when she spoke in the Bundestag, and she decided not to mention it. So other than President Macron, who had his defense minister meet with some of the sanctioned MEPs, other than Boris Johnson, who personally met with some of the sanctioned British parliamentarians, the Chancellor did not signal any solidarity. The Foreign Ministry did, but not the Chancellor.
Wow. So what does this mean in terms of US-EU cooperation on China? This has certainly been something that the Biden administration has promoted. I think the approval by the at the highest level of the EU-China investment agreement right before the new year was viewed as something of a step back. Is this a way that things get reset? And is there really a way forward where the United States and Europe can work together?
Look, Tony Blinken was in Brussels last week. He met with the High Representative for Foreign Policy, the Vice President of the Commission, Josep Borrell, and they agreed that they would continue the transatlantic dialogue on China that Borrell had originally proposed to Mike Pompeo. So from the Brussels perspective, there is clearly this will to team up with the Biden team and to strongly involve on a whole range of issues. And I was very happy to see President Biden raise the question of whether there couldn't be cooperative answer to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Indeed, the European Union has just been working on its own connectivity strategy, and I think we would be well prepared to team up with the Biden administration on that front, for instance. So I think from Brussels, there is clearly the will. Von der Leyen may not be the strongest president of the Commission that we've ever had, but she clearly has a very strong transatlantic inclination. She showed that when she was Germany's defense minister, and she certainly is willing to move in that direction. She's also being considered a China hawk from the Chinese, so they don't trust her as much as they trust her mentor, the chancellor. And from the European perspective, I think things are beginning to get rolling. That, of course, is only going to be effective if the major capitals, namely Paris and Berlin and Madrid and Warsaw and Rome, will also play along. I think you can trust Warsaw on that count. Madrid has just uttered very nonsensical Chinese propaganda, echoed China's propaganda statements. That was not very, very pleasant. Paris is taking a tougher stance on this than Berlin is. Rome used to be viewed suspiciously under the former government because they did sign a memorandum of understanding on the Belt and Road Initiative, but the present Italian government is much more clear-spoken on China than their predecessors. So I think the overall trajectory is positive. Germany being the most problematic player in this moment.
Okay, so who would like to ask the first question? Frank Fukuyama.
So thank you very much. That was a very interesting presentation. My question has to do with the German business community and its perception of China. You know, one of the things that's really changed very dramatically in the United States is that a large part of the American business community has really gotten very disillusioned with China, not Wall Street. They're still eager to jump in. But I think a lot of manufacturing companies like GM have really gotten burned with technology theft and so forth. And I've spoken at length with Jörg Wuttke, the head of the European business whatever community in Beijing, who is actually quite hostile to China and has been for some time. But what is the attitude now, and has that been changing in recent years with, for example, all of the taking of German technology from Mittelstand companies and that sort of thing?
May I answer that directly, Craig?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for the question. Great question. I would say that one of the secrets behind the emanating change of Europe's China policy lies with an internal division of the German business community. Some of the audience may remember that in January 2019, the German Federation of Industry, BDI, was the first European entity that published a very critical China strategy. At the time, if Siemens could have prevented it, they would have liked to stop it, but they were not able. Some of the big players were not able to stop it. I would say that over the last 5 years, there has been a gradual shift of opinion, which has not reached yet the corporate headquarters of Volkswagen, Daimler, Allianz, some of the other multinational corporations, many of which have put too many eggs into the Chinese basket and are too dependent on that market by now. But certainly among the Mittelstand that you mentioned, Mr. Fukuyama, there has been a shift of opinion. And this is showing not only with the BDI, it's also showing with the machine tool industry, the BDMA, or with the electrical industry, the ZVEI. I've been talking to these industry organizations for years, and they would normally tell me that I'm too critical, that I'm too skeptical, that things are going to turn out better than I predict. And they have shifted also recently, because what they experience increasingly is this. The Chinese engineers are out to eat the German engineers' lunch. And that became apparent in 2015 when China published its Made in China 2025 strategy, which clearly signaled that they did not only want to take the lead technologically with most other modern productive technologies, from 3D printing to AI to high-performance computing to e-mobility, what have you, but also that they pursued a nationalistic economic strategy that was meant to sort of force out international competition and not allow them a role in the Chinese market, and increasingly also in third markets. So the very favorable relationship that Germany has enjoyed economically with China over so many years was built on the fact that German industry provided to China the high tech products and the luxury cars that they craved, while they provided our market with cheap mass production. But as China moves up through the value chain, there is an increasing competition, and the Made in China 2025 strategy has now been integrated more or less into the 14th five-year plan. So clearly, Germany has to understand now, and businesses are doing that they cannot cannot lie back and expect to continue benefiting from the Chinese market in the long run, and that they might experience something similar to the rail industry, where the now very powerful Chinese rail industry was built with support from Siemens and Alstom, and now they can't get a foot on the ground in China and are losing third markets increasingly to the big state monopolist, CRRC. And this is also increasingly the fate that some of them fear in their own sectors. So this is an economic basis for a shift of attitude in the business community. It's not uniform. Still, I say some of the big corporate headquarters don't play along, don't see that this way, but increasingly this is widely shared.
Okay. Dan Seligson.
Hey, thank you very much. Look, this is very interesting. I particularly like the way you opened with the, China is basically telling Western Europe, take it or leave it. But my question goes a little bit on the side or to background, and that is China allows its 60 million Christians more religious freedom than its 25 million Muslims. Or does it? And is there something about Muslims or Islam that China feels particularly threatened about that makes them take this stance, which is unpopular, and they'll do it anyway? That's the question. Thank you very much.
Well, I would argue that the Christians are under heavy pressure, even though the Pope has been trying to strike deals with the communist leadership of China. Still, we hear information about churches being pulled down and of oppression. But in the case of the Uyghur Muslims, there is two elements that are negative from the perspective of Beijing's leadership. One is that they listen to external religious authorities, which China hates. So the other is that they constitute a national minority with its own distinct cultural heritage, with its own cemeteries, with its own poetry, with its own language. Chinese Christians speak Han like everybody else. The Uyghurs speak their own language. The Uyghurs have been proud of defending their own heritage, but under Xi Jinping, there has been a fundamental change of China's policy towards national minorities. And that is being analyzed and described much better than I can do by some real specialists who work on China's policy towards national minorities. But whereas for so many years after the founding of the People's Republic, national minorities had a certain level of liberty in sort of honoring and living and supporting and sustaining their own cultural traditions. The new leadership pursues a policy of forced integration, where the Uyghurs are not anymore respected as a national minority, but as a group of population that has to be transformed in being real Chinese. So there is a forced integrationist paradigm that views the national minorities as uncultured, not up to par to modern China, and as also a risk of loss of loyalty, maybe because of their tendency to pursue their own way of life. You see that not only with regard to the Uyghurs, you also see that with regard to the Mongols. The Mongols have been viewed as China's model minority. Very little problems through the decades. Last year, thunder struck, and all of a sudden Beijing decreed that they couldn't use Mongol in the schools as much as they used to anymore. And that created the first disruption of political life in Inner Mongolia for so many years. So this also is being applied to the Hui nationality, which has never had any history of terrorism or separatism. So this is not just a special Uyghur policy, but it's more strictly enforced on the Uyghurs because the religious mistrust And so the mistrust against the national group is combining and makes Beijing bear down very heavily.
Okay. Next question.
Craig, I'll jump in if you don't have anybody available
Go ahead,
at the moment.
please.
Thank you,
And then
Craig. Thank
Anna?
you, Reinhard. This is really very interesting. I want to ask something that is a little bit of a parenthesis, but indulge me. You mentioned in passing the role, view, and conduct of Angela Merkel. Could you tell us, now that she comes to the end of her career as chancellor, how you best understand her and what it reflects in CDU politics on the balancing of human rights and democracy and other interests? Is she struggling with equities and stakeholders on an issue like China or Nord Stream 2? Is it a function of working with social democratic partners, or is this her inner realpolitik coming out? She started, of course, in a very different place as an East German and someone who was a champion of human rights. She's in a different moment now. Could you help us understand her a little bit on these issues and what, if anything, it reflects in CDU politics?
Well, I would say Angela Merkel has never been a very ideological person. She has always been a pragmatist, but she has also always had this freedom gene. I mean, whenever there was an issue that would rhyme with freedom, she was there and she stood and she defended freedom. And when she had the opportunity of speaking in front of Congress many years ago, she said that very eloquently, and many of us believed her. And I still believe that this is something that is core to this woman, that she believes in freedom. So I don't think she harbors any illusions about the regime of Xi Jinping. I don't think that she doubts for a minute that he is a totalitarian dictator. She's never said so, and I couldn't quote her, but my assumption is she knows that to the detail. But she is also holding a defeatist view, holding a declinist view. She is of the opinion that we cannot stand up to China as it grows ever more powerful. And because of that, we have to make compromises in the way that she does. I recall talking to her a couple of years ago about China. She was so outspoken. And I also recall that during years when few European leaders would talk about human rights in China, you could always count on just three individuals, Cameron, Merkel, and Donald Tusk. Everybody else shut up, those three would speak. And Merkel even managed to convince Chinese leaders to allow the widow of Liu Xiaobo to exit from China and to move to Berlin, which was a great achievement. So she has merits in that regard. But more recently, and I think that is also a result of her analysis of transatlantic relations, a worsening of the relationship between the US and the EU, she has come to take a declinist view and says, we cannot stand up to China. This is why we have to vote.
Okay. Next question goes to Ana Palacio. We're really pleased to have you with us today, Ana.
It's a pleasure. I'm sorry I was a bit late in joining. Issues with police and wearing a mask, but that's not an issue. Well, first of all, Reinhard, it's great to have you. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you all for inviting me to this. I have one comment and one question. My comment is that to what extent do you really think that there is a debate. I think that it's growing, but in the European societies, so in Spain, in France, in Italy, that is really, that goes to the granularity. I think that what has happened to you and the sanctions has been a wake-up call. It's true, and we were surprised that at the Bundestag, Merkel did not even mention Merrick, did not mention anything. But frankly, the way you say it, I remember the World Economic Forum intervention by Xi Jinping and the way she responded. And in the way she responded, you could feel that she was in absolute, she was in disagreement, but she didn't dare to say it openly. She said something, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but you know, I'm not absolutely in agreement with you. Cooperating doesn't mean, means having better relations or things like that that were very tepid. But my question is, to what extent you don't think that this declinism is in societies? And I'm speaking for Spanish society. You are absolutely right. For the government, the day before yesterday, there was an article published by the former Prime Minister Zapatero, the socialist Prime Minister, that was, if not written by the Chinese, it was absolutely aligned to the Chinese positions. But what I wonder is, to what extent we, the Europeans, the citizens, see this debate, to what extent they have a clear representation of what China is. And as I say, I think, or I feel that there is a turning point coinciding with these sanctions. My question, and I'm sorry if maybe you have responded to this at the beginning, what is your perception of the investment agreement with China? Good. And the future of the procedure in the European Parliament? How do you see the Parliament aligned? How do you see that it can be reviewed? I just read this morning some declarations by Chinese officials saying that they could not envisage that this could be changed. I mean, that's my comment. So on the one hand, declinism, I think, at least in the southern societies, it's here. Hopefully, there is a turning point, but hopefully, I don't want to be over optimistic. And what's the future? Because if there is a positioning of the European Parliament, this can make a lot as well.
Reinhard?
Well, it's great meeting you this way, Anna. I hope your trouble with the police is only superficial. Look, I don't think that our societies have fully woken up yet. I would not be surprised if there was a poll that would compare Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. That I would not be surprised if more people felt that Donald Trump has been the much greater danger to Europeans than Xi Jinping ever will be. I don't know, but so there is a different way in which Europeans look at the United States and are aware of what happens in the United States and have an opinion on what happens in the United States, whereas China is still not extremely well known. China literacy is at a low ebb, I would say. And for a long while, China was just a great opportunity to sell the great products that our industry offers on the market. So China is the ultimate proof that made in Germany is represents great quality, and aren't they smart buying our Volkswagen and our Porsche and our Mercedes-Benz. So I think the reality of China as a society, as a political entity, is not as widely understood as it should be. And this is why, even though I completely agree with you that this will turn out to be a turning point, it will need a lot of effort to make people aware of where we are. And then there is this one other element that Merkel also addressed in the Davos context. She said, and I'm not quoting her literally, but she signaled, we don't want to join a camp. We don't want to join China's camp. We don't want to join Joe Biden's camp. We don't want to join a camp. And I think this is a widely shared attitude, that people think that the Europeans might still have the liberty of deciding not to join a camp and still be happy to trade with everybody, and of course also voice criticism if need be. But the new geopolitical reality in which China says, either you are obedient or we hit you, that new reality has not been fully understood, and the geopolitical consequences of that new reality has to be digested now.
Okay, Fritz Heinzen.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
Wait. What about the KaiA, Reinhard? What's going to happen with the agreement in the European Parliament?
Look, I don't think it will come up for ratification anytime before the fourth quarter of this year at the earliest, probably first quarter next year. But at the moment, nobody's even working on it. It's been sort of put into the deep freezer. KaiA is not being debated at the moment. Even those in the parliament who support the deal today say we cannot do business as usual while China sanctions the parliament. And this is understood as a confrontational attack on the parliament as such, not just on a few individuals. They sanctioned the 5 members of the 4 major democratic groups in the European Parliament. They made a point of hitting all the 4 major democratic groups. They made a point of sanctioning the whole human rights subcommittee. They made a point of signaling they don't want to deal with the China delegation anymore. This has been understood as an attack on the institution as such, and therefore this is not being debated at the moment. This, if nothing changes, this will never materialize.
Okay, Fritz. Fritz Heinzen.
All right, thank you. Thank you for your time today. Very much appreciate your comments. Very interesting. I'm curious about 5G still, because I know from everything I've been reading, Britain and France have pretty well pushed Huawei and ZTE away. And Germany, I think, has put several billion into finding alternatives to the Chinese 5G. So if France, Germany, Britain are heading in the other direction, is China pretty much going to, in the end, kill any attempts at getting 5G, their Huawei and ZTE into Europe?
On 5G, Germany is the laggard. The Polish have moved, the Danish have moved, a couple of nations have, the Swedish have moved, just Germany refuses to move. And this is because there is an unresolved political contradiction between the Chancellor's office on one side and a large part of her own party, CDU, under the leadership of Norbert Röttgen, on the other side, including the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of the Interior, which is led by CSU, the Foreign Ministry, the services. This is the first conflict ever that I remember where the national security community battled the mercantilist people to a standstill. So that's where we are, which is a great achievement for the national security people, but we have not been able to overcome the resistance by the chancellor. Now this is pending in the Bundestag, and it may not be resolved before we have a new coalition. In case we get a new coalition, this will go France's way or Britain's way or the Danish way, because FDP, the liberals, is critical. Social Democrats are critical. We have always been opposed. So whatever the combination will be, I think the chances are that Germany will join the bandwagon.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you.
Last question goes to Kevin Curran. Kevin? Okay.
Sorry, is this working here?
Yeah. Fire
Sorry, I was
away.
having trouble there.
Keep
My
it
camera's
keep it short, because exactly at 12:55 we have to end.
Okay, so we'll miss out on the 17+1. But I did want to ask about the CAI's commitment to climate change issues. Valdis Dombrovskis in Latvia had said that he thinks that China can remain like a consistent ally on climate change issues, and this seems to be completely ring-fenced off from other issues. I'm curious, especially as a Green Party member, whether you think that it is possible to ring-fence climate cooperation from the other issues where China is obviously a systemic rival.
Great question.
I don't think it's possible to ring-fence climate change. China has told us that they're not going to allow that. And if you look at the provisions in the CAI deal, they are way behind the curve. So China pledges to uphold its commitment under the Paris Accord, which is, as everybody knows, not sufficient to attain the goals that Paris has formulated. And if China would want to signal that they will live up to the pledges that Xi Jinping made at the United Nations General Assembly, they would have to show more ambition in the deal too. So I think the pledge is not a very strong one. Apart from that, when you look not at the letter of the deal, but at the action of the government, then you see that they are moving in a different direction. Under the 14th five-year plan, CO2 emissions from coal will continue year by year. China is not on a phase-out trajectory. China is exporting more coal technology along the Belt and Road. If everything goes according to their plans, more than 200 coal-fired power plants will be built along the Belt and Road initiative. So China is not living up to the necessary ambition. And a lot of people around Europe do indeed say China is an indispensable partner on climate. I would answer they are indispensable, all right, but so far they're not yet a partner.
Reinhard, thank you so much. We're getting close to the end time, and I know you have a really hard stop. I want to thank you for giving us so much time today. I'd urge everyone to go to American Purpose and check out the interview that Gary Schmitt and I did with Reinhard in January, and also the number of articles that have appeared on American Purpose in the last month or so around this China issue. We're really appreciative, Reinhard, and we hope to get you back at some later date, maybe after the CAI has been defeated.
Whatever, I'd love to be back.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you
Have
all.
a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.